Because there's an extent to which, I mean, people are talking about, when you sort of said, atheism, anti-theism, implicit in what you're saying is an idea almost that atheism is fragmenting. I mean, maybe it always has. I mean, it's a mistake to see atheism as a form of belief, and obviously that's a tangent that's too far to one side for us to follow too far. But atheism is an absence of belief, but there are the atheists who want to... There's a very powerful lobby within atheism who find characters like Dawkins problematic. They're too spiky. We need to be cuddly with religious people. And obviously Satanism, to a certain extent, Satanism is... I mean, I've described it as kind of a form of militant atheism with Gothic overtones. And I think you touched on something there which is certainly important to the way I see it. I see the whole thing is that you should have fun with it. Mm-hmm. Fun's probably the wrong word, but you should find it fulfilling. You said exhilarating.
Right.
And so...
Should be enjoyable.
Yeah. There's got to be, the devil does have the best tunes. He also has the best movies and, and let's hope the best podcasts eventually. And so I guess, traditionally, not traditionally, in popular opinion, you have atheism here and Satanism here. And Satanism's, this mad Venn diagram I'm coming up with in my head at the moment, you have like Satanism having this big sort of overlap with the occult, whatever the hell that is. And so we're somewhere according to that model, we're somewhere in the same basket as dream catchers and Wiccans and pixies and all this kind of thing. Whereas that's not the case, is it?
No. I mean, Byron certainly was not as much of an atheist as Shelley. Byron had this sort of perverted form of Calvinist belief, literally beat into him as a child. And so he indulged these fantasies of himself as some sort of fallen or cursed being. Apparently he told his wife that he felt like he was, among those angels from Genesis 6 who were exiled to the earth because they took mortal wives for mates and so on and so forth. Essentially that he was doomed to bad behavior. Shelley was more atheistic than that, certainly. But Shelley also... experimented with some things you might call occult. But I do think that their significance, the Romantic Satanist, Byron, Shelley, and so on, I do think that they were responsible for bestowing upon the character of Lucifer, or Satan, much more majesty than anything any occult order, past or present, has gotten up to.
You're touching on something there which I do think is interesting and significant, which is, I seem to recall you saying that, along the lines of that these artistic, in this case, literary movements are far more significant to Satanism and Satanism's significance than any occult order. And I think I've said something similar, whereby you can have as many guys in dressing gowns in basements as you like, and they will not have an iota of the influence of somebody who knows what they're doing with art, literature, film, whatever else. The dark arts are the arts.
Absolutely, and that's not to detract from those who like ourselves would overtly assert ourselves as Satanists. But when you're talking about people like Godwin, Wollstonecraft, Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Shelley, William Blake, William Hazlitt, so on and so forth. You're not talking about, teen dabblers here. You're talking about titans of a literary and cultural era. So you have these tremendous personages, the leading intellectuals, poets, prose writers, and visual artists as well, all experimenting with this idea of Satan, taking the Miltonic model and expanding upon it, really exalting it,
I mean, how important you're saying the leading there, because I often think is interesting is you go back, and when I've, like yourself, I've studied this and I've written about it, and one significant thing is the level to which what they're saying is shocking at the time. And in context, I mean, how was Byron's sort of, demonic persona perceived? Did people see him as being this devilish, Shelley? How shocking was it back then?
It depends. In the case of Byron, what really launched him into the limelight was his archetype of the Byronic hero, which he created initially in 1812 with the creation of Childe Harold. And Childe Harold was always seen as a thin veneer of Byron himself.
Sure.
And so both Childe Harold and Byron were very much appealing because they were these sort of bad boy outsider figures who were satanic insofar as they were outsiders. They were melancholic, prideful but pained, rebellious, somewhat misanthropic, yet idealistic, the sort of joining of contradictions. But Byron sort of loses control of that a little bit, so he begins to be genuinely vilified, and ultimately has to exile himself from England because of these sort of cancerous rumors spreading about his scandalous sexual escapades of sodomy, still a capital crime, and even rumors of incest with his half-sister. So then he has to exile himself, and that actually, it amplifies the significance of the satanic figure, because of course that's central to, Milton describes Satan, the apostate angel. That's a big part of it, is his being an exiled figure, an outcast. Shelley was, I think he really received a lot of backlash for his beliefs. For instance, he was expelled from Oxford University for
necessity of atheism,
right,
wasn't it? Yes,
refusing to deny authorship and distribution of a pamphlet on atheism, the necessity of atheism. So early on, he was.
It's interesting, I suppose. One of the things I'm getting at is that because I was reading a news report today, and I think it was. I was scanning through the headlines, and some guy in Russia being sent to jail for, I think it was a blog about atheism. And it's interesting as well. I mean, when I first started writing Lucifer Rising, to return to that in the early 90s, within a lot of the cultural, obviously I work in different cultural circles, but I suppose a lot of the cultural circles I was moving in, where it was it was English, it was middle class, it was quite academic, and there was an assumption that religion was basically on the way out. That, and I suppose a central point of reference was the Church of England, in which case they were largely right. And that if we just sort of, just sort of sat there and didn't pay attention, then everything would be okay. And then, of course, everything kicked off, 9/11, and the situation we're in now, which I think largely, because one of the things, say when I was talking about Satanism, I was saying, what's the point? It's all its way out. You can kind of you don't need to. And the situation has moved from being, what's the point of Satanism, to how can Satanism possibly compete with the horrors of modern religion? And I suppose I want to move this discussion around to talking a little bit about what these guys were saying, or what these guys meant, that's relevant to us today. And also, move along a bit as well to sort of talk about this in the context of modern Satanism.